Good evening, guys, or morning, or whenever you're watching this. It's already week 4, and in statistics this week, we're going to be doing standard deviation. Now, last week, to recap, we were doing mean, median, mode, range, and interquartile range, right? You're going to use a lot of those skills in this week to calculate what we call standard deviation. Now, a couple things. What I have in front of you here is some vocabulary you should know prior to the lesson. Like, you guys should know what the word sum means, difference. The mean is from last week. The degrees of freedom is something we're going to learn in this lesson. I want to point it out ahead of time so he can let you know what it is, so you don't feel that it comes out of nowhere. The degrees of freedom is basically the number of independent values or quantities which can be assigned to a statistical distribution. We calculate it by using n minus 1. Now, this is really what you guys should be paying attention to, because you're going to see this again later on. However, I'm just letting you know this right away. This n minus 1 doesn't just come out of nowhere. We're talking about a data set. We're talking about a total number of numbers. And in this case, n is just, n is equal to the number of numbers in a data set. So for example, if we have 10 numbers inside of a data set, our n is 10. And the way we calculate degrees of freedom is by subtracting 10 minus 1. It's always going to be whatever your n is minus 1. In our case here, we're only going to have a data set with 5 numbers. So it'll be 5 minus 1. Just a heads up for what you're going to see. Also, there's something called a square root. I don't know how many of you guys remember what a square root is, but just in case, a square root is this symbol. You should see it on your calculator, right? And the way that we would calculate a square root is, think of a square root as it's a number. There's only a couple of numbers that are what we call perfect square roots, right? Let's do this one. Say I wanted to find out the square root of 49. What that means is, in order to have a square root, it means that there's two numbers that multiply by themselves, by each other, to equal the number inside of the square root. However, the catch is it has to be the same number. So for example, 49 is a perfect square root because 7 multiplies by 7 to give me 49, right? So the square root of 49 is just one of the sevens. This is just a quick example of what that means. For the sake of this lesson and this week, you're just going to use a calculator. We're not going to I just need you to know what a square root is. But really, I need you to locate this symbol when you have a calculator. Depending if you have a iPhone calculator, you need to put the number first and then push that symbol. If you have an Android, most of the calculators on there, you need to put this symbol first, then put the number inside of it, and then put equals in order to get your answer. You're going to have to do that later on. So let's get on with it. So this is a little different. I've outlined the steps that you're going to have to follow. In order for you to calculate something called standard deviation, we have 5 steps. Okay, so don't worry about writing down everything you see on this here. If I were you, I would pause the video at this point. You could take a quick screenshot on your, if you're on the phone, or if you're on a computer, you can just also take a screenshot of this, so you can have this as a reference. Take a picture, whatever it is. If you want to copy it down by hand, I would strongly suggest you copy down the next slide by hand, not necessarily this one. Just listen to what I have to say for this one. The first step to calculate standard deviation is something that you should know how to do by now. You did it last week. It's finding the mean. If you notice, this is the data set we're going to be working with. There's only 5 numbers in this data set: 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25, which means that if we want to find the mean, we have to add up all these numbers, and that's what I did here. So if you notice, that's what I did here. I added up 5 plus 10 plus 15 plus 20 plus 25, right? I added them all up, and I got 75. Then, right, I divide them by 5. Why? Because when I'm finding the mean, I take the total amount of the sum and I divide it by the number of numbers, right? So remember how I said there was only 5 numbers in this data set? That's where I got 5 from. I divided 75, which is the sum, by 5 to get 25. My mean is 25. This is going to come up in the next slide. You'll see what I mean by that. But that's the first step. You always want to find the mean of whatever data set they give you. Put that aside. The next step, you're going to have to subtract the mean, right? In this case, it's 25, from every single number in your data set. Yes, this is going to take a while. You're calculating the standard deviation by hand, and some of the data sets are going to have a lot of numbers. By a lot, I mean like 10, 11, 12 numbers, right? So this is you're gonna have to organize yourself in whatever ways works best for you. The next slide has a way of organizing it, so just listen to what I'm trying to say right now, and then move on to the next. But you can always come back to this, all right? So don't freak out. We're gonna have to subtract. So if you notice here, I took the 5. Let's start with the 5, right? I took the 5, and I wanted to subtract 25 from it. So 5 minus 25. You might be thinking, shouldn't the 25 go first? No, it should not. Standard deviation takes into account negative numbers. And we take into account negative numbers by doing something called squaring them. We're not going to end up with negative numbers at the end of the day. We are, however, it is okay to have a negative number during step 2, though, okay? So in this case, it's you take the data set, which is 5, and you subtract the mean, which is minus 25. You end up with a negative 20. That's okay. You do the same thing with 10, 15, 20, and 25. So if you notice, the next thing I did, 10 minus 25, negative 15. Then I did 15. 15 minus 25, I got negative 10. 20 minus 25, I got negative 5. And 25 minus 25, I got 0. I'm still not done with step 2. I still need to do another part. I'm going to do something called squaring. I'm going to square all the sums that I just got. Now, squaring is the same as doing this. Do you guys remember that 2, that little 2? What that means is that's not saying 5 times 2. Don't make that mistake, okay? What this is actually saying is I'm going to multiply the number inside of the parentheses by itself twice. So that's going to be 5. Whoops, that's a terrible 5. Okay, that was embarrassing. Let me just start over. Okay, 5. Oh man, my computer hates me. Times 5 equals 25. So that's really what's going on here. After I've subtracted them and I got my negative numbers, right? So remember, you might recall this is a negative 5, and that's going to be important later too. This is actually all negative 5 times negative 5, right? I'm going to end up with a positive number, right? I'm just putting it there so you know that a negative times a negative, right? Any negative number multiplying by another negative number is going to give me a positive number, which is why that 25 is positive, okay? So I know I'm throwing a lot of rules at you. You might need to watch this video more than one time. Just saying, if you don't, great. But you're just gonna be practicing how to find the standard deviation for this entire week. So please join me for Zoom and all that stuff. If you're like stuck, if you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Okay, so we're gonna move on to step 3, because right here, if you notice, I did that to all of them, right? And if you notice, I kept all the negatives and I made sure they were positives. Now, you might notice there's no 0 here, right? Because I had a 0 here, and there's no 0 here. Well, 0 times 0 is just 0, so it's kind of gone. It's not there anymore. Okay, so now we're on step 3, right? For step 3, I'm gonna sum. I'm gonna need the sum of all my previous. I'm gonna have to add all my previous answers, right? So in this case, I added my answer that I got from the previous step, 25 plus 100 plus 225 plus 400. It's going to equal 750. If you're wondering where I got 25, 100, 225, 400 from, there were these answers, guys. They were after I squared them. I squared all of them and I got these answers. So in step 3, I had to add all of those answers together to get one big number. Now I'm currently at the end of step 3. My number is 750. What am I going to do with that number? I'm going to go on to step 4. All right. I'm going to divide my number. My previous answer in this case is 750 by the degrees of freedom. Now, if you remember from earlier, we were talking about degrees of freedom. It's n minus 1. And again, I'm going to show you where this comes from later. I just don't want to overwhelm you with the formula just yet. N minus 1, right? Since we only have, again, 5 numbers in our data set, n is equal to 5. Therefore, 5 minus 1, right? So we have n minus 1. If there's only 5 numbers in our data set, n is equal to 5. Therefore, 5 minus 1 is equal to 4. My degrees of freedom equals, equals 4, right? So the step says that I have to divide my previous answer by 4, which means I have a fraction. 750, if I put that into my calculator, when I'm dividing fractions, remember the numerator goes first if you're putting this into a calculator. So it's 750, dividing symbol, then 4 gives us 187.5. I'm right here, right? My last answer is to square root my previous answer. I need to square root this. I'm not done. If I stopped at step 4, I would be at something called variance. This is something you might run into later. Like, let's say a problem asks you, hey, find the variance of this number, right? You just need to do everything you're normally doing, but stop at step 4, and that's your variance. If you continue to step 5, you have found your standard deviation, okay? This is something I'm going to ask you about in one of the daily questions, so make sure you write it down in your notes, right? Step 5, how do we convert our variance into our square root? Well, we're going to have to, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. How do we convert our variance into our standard deviation? Well, we have to square root it. So we're going to square root 187.5. Again, if you're using an iPhone, for whatever reason, when you put your calculator to the side, it'll give you more options. Go ahead and put 187.5 and then put that square root symbol. Find the square root symbol. Your square root symbol, by the way, if you see something like this, that's a square root symbol too. I don't know why it has that. Sometimes it'll just have the other thing. Go ahead and find this symbol, put it in and see what you get, right? If you square root this, you should get this answer right here. If you did it correctly on your iPhone, it's 13.69. If you're like, I don't have an iPhone, pull out your, I have a regular calculator or I have a regular Android, go ahead and put the symbol first and then put 187.5 and then put equals, and you should still get 13.69. There's a couple other numbers. I just kind of rounded it off. In the future, you can always round off to a second decimal point, okay? I'll go over rounding in the Zoom or in the general comments of the Google Classroom if you guys are having trouble. Okay, so let me show you what I mean. This is all really confusing. Here's another way for you to organize it, okay? Now what I did was I made a chart, right? How to organize all your information into this chart, right? We know that our mean is 25 because we calculated that in the previous problem, right? This is still the same problem. I'm just showing you how I would organize it, all right? By the way, the X with the little hat on top, that means mean, right? It's not a regular X, that's your mean. But anyways, I'm gonna put all my X values, all the numbers in my data set onto the right here, right? This is all step 2. This entire chart is all step 2. Remember your mean, this is step 1. This entire chart is step 2, right? Because you're gonna be doing this, and you're gonna be doing this. This is your step 3 down here. This is your step 4 right here. And this is your step 5 right here. Okay, so that's how this table is organized, all right? So if you notice, my X values are just my data set. 5, 10, 15, 20, these numbers right here. These are all just my data set. I put them in order from least to greatest. You don't have to do that, but it helps sometimes when you're dealing with large numbers to put them in order. Then what I did was I found the difference from the mean. In the previous one, this was step 2, right? Remember, I don't know if you, I hope this is familiar, because 5 minus 25 is negative 20. If you notice, I put all the x values first. All of these guys are these guys right here. Then I subtracted my 25. I got negative numbers for all of them. That's not always going to be the case for you. Sometimes you're going to have numbers that are bigger and you're going to end up with a positive number. That's okay. But negatives are okay too, and zeros are fine too, because of what we're going to do next. Okay. So these are all my answers. Then I need to square them, right? That's this one. So I took each one of these answers, this negative 20, I put it here. I put the little 2 next to it, which means that I'm going to multiply negative 20 times negative 20, which gives me 400. That's where I got 400 from. Then I did the same thing for the 15. I got negative 15 times negative 15, because it's 15 squared. And I got 225. I did the same thing. Negative 10 times negative 10 is 100. Negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25. And then 0 times 0 is just 0. Step 3, we're on step 3 now. Remember here, the sum of the difference of the mean. All right? So this is doing that. I just added all of my previous numbers. All the numbers that I circled, 400 plus 225 plus 100 plus 25, gave me 750. That's the end of my step 3. Now I'm moving on to step 4, right? Divide by the degrees of freedom. I took 750 and I put it into a fraction. Okay, there. 750, and I divided it by a fraction, n minus 1, right? Now, we've established that n is just the number of numbers in my data set. And if you remember, there was only 5 numbers in my data set. So I replaced n with 5, and I subtracted the 1. Where does the 1 come from? It's kind of just part of the formula. I could go into why that is, but this video would be too long. 750 divided by 4, right? We get 187.5. So remember, these are the steps from the previous slide, right? I'm just showing you a better way of organizing all that information. Now, once we have 187.5, we need to square root our answer. That is step 5. Square root your answer. Square root of 187.5 is approximately 13.69. Again, the only way you'd be able to do that is if you put it into a calculator. You can calculate that by hand, but that takes too long. And this lesson isn't about whether you know how to square root. It's about whether you can find the standard deviation. So square root is just kind of part of it. Use a calculator, okay? Your final answer here is 13.69, and we have found the standard deviation. That is what we were looking for, all right? So where does all this come from, and where am I getting all these steps from? Well, there's a formula. There's a formula for how to find standard deviation, and it kind of looks like this. Yeah, that's the formula. All the 5, believe it or not, math is a language that you have to kind of learn. And if you can learn what the symbols mean, you're basically getting instructions on how to solve it. All 5 of those steps that I just told you are actually inside of this one formula. You don't believe me? Here it goes. That giant E means sum. That X means all the data points. That X squared, that X with the hat on top is the mean. The n is the number of numbers, and the whole thing is a fraction. So how are all the 5 steps into this one equation? Well, here it goes. You work on the outside and you kind of work, you work from the inside and you kind of work outside and you kind of expand out. The first part, this should look familiar, right? Your data point minus this, right? We have to do this with every single data point. So if my data set has 5 numbers, I do this step 5 times. If my data set has 10 numbers, I have to do this step 10 times. If my data set has 1,000 numbers, I would have to do this step 1,000 times, okay? That's why I decided to go with the steps instead of just trying to solve with the formula, okay? Now, in this case, right, really what's going on is this is saying, the E is saying I need to sum all these times. So since there was 5, right, x1 minus this, x2 minus this, x3 minus this, x4 minus this, x5 minus this. If you're wondering where I'm getting the numbers from, there is just 5 numbers in a data set. I just the first number, the second number, the third number, the fourth number, the fifth number. The E, right, means the sum. That means that the answers, I have to add them all up. Whatever I get, I'm going to add them up and I'm going to get one single number. That number has to be divided by n minus 1. And of course, we can't forget about the square root. Square root of whatever this number was by n minus 1. That's basically what we did. That's how all 5 steps are in here. I just wanted to show you guys that. For the sake of this lesson, don't worry about the formula. Worry about the steps, okay? I want you guys to be able to fill this chart out. You guys are not going to have that many problems this week, but each problem, as you can see, has a lot of steps. So I want to see every single step. I want to see you organize the charts. I want to see things labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want to see all 5 steps labeled. Be as specific as possible, right? Because if you get something wrong, it can be at any one of these points. If you get one thing wrong in one of these steps, the whole answer is wrong. And I'm not going to take off all the points from this. If you get something wrong, I am, however, going to point out you got something wrong. I want you to look at it again. On a test, on a quiz, you will get points taken off if you get something wrong, but you're not going to lose all the points. You can still get partial credit depending on if you did everything else correct. Like if you messed up once, I'm going to take off 1 point. Let's say a question like this was worth 10 points and you messed up once and everything else was done correctly according to the steps, I would only take off 1 point. You get 9 out of 10. If you messed up 5 times, I give you 5 out of 10. If you completely just destroyed the whole thing, I'm not going to give you any points, right? So please, log into Zoom if you're confused. You can always go to Khan Academy and look up some videos as well, and send me questions throughout Google Classroom, and make sure to answer all the questions in your daily assignments. All right, guys. Good luck. See you later.